I never thought I'd be the kind of man to inherit something that would change everything. But there I was, at 54 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office in Austin, Texas, holding papers that said I'd just inherited a $68 million ranch. Not just any ranch, the kind of property that takes your breath away. 3,000 acres of pure Texas landscape, cattle operations that ran like clockwork, and a main house that looked like something out of a magazine. My uncle had left it to me. We'd been close when I was younger, and apparently that bond meant something to him, even after all these years. I remember the feeling when the lawyer said those words. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was more like numbness mixed with disbelief. $68 million. My whole life I'd worked hard. I wasn't poor, but I wasn't rich either. I was a man who'd built something modest, something real with his own hands. And now this enormous responsibility that I didn't ask for, that I'd never expected, would fall on my shoulders. The first person I called was my ex-wife, Rachel. Not because I had to, but because we had 3 kids together, and I thought maybe I was naive. I thought she'd want to hear the news. Maybe she'd be happy for me. God, I was stupid. We'd been divorced for 7 years, and while things weren't ugly between us, they weren't warm either. She'd remarried. She had a new life. I figured this would be ancient history to her. "You're joking," she said when I told her over the phone. "No, I'm serious. The lawyer just confirmed everything. The ranch, the operations, all of it." There was this pause, this long, terrible pause, where I could practically hear her mind working on the other end of the line. "How much exactly?" she asked. That should have been my first red flag. Not congratulations, not that's amazing, but how much? Like she was calculating something. Like numbers were suddenly the only thing that mattered. I shouldn't have told her the exact figure, but I did. 68 million. I said it out loud, and I felt something shift in the world between us. Within 48 hours, Rachel had called our 3 kids, Marcus, who was 26, Jennifer, who was 24, and David, who was 20. She didn't call to congratulate them on their father's good fortune. She called them to strategize. I found out through Marcus, who actually had the decency to feel uncomfortable about the whole thing. He came to see me at my place in Dallas, and he looked sick about it. "Dad, Mom's been talking to us non-stop," he said, sitting on my couch like he was carrying the weight of the world. "She's saying the ranch should be considered part of our inheritance, that you have a responsibility to set up trusts for us, that—" He ran his hand through his hair. "Dad, she's got a lawyer now. She's serious about this." I just stared at him. My son, 26 years old, and his mother had already convinced him that his father's unexpected blessing was somehow their birthright to claim. "What did you tell her?" I asked carefully. "I told her I didn't know, that it was your inheritance, not ours." He looked at me with this mixture of guilt and confusion. "But she keeps saying you have an obligation, that we're still your responsibility." The thing about manipulation is that it's subtle at first. It doesn't come in screaming. It comes in whispers, in reasonable-sounding arguments, in the guise of love and family obligation. Rachel started calling me every day, every single day, sometimes twice a day. The conversations always followed the same pattern. She'd start with something casual, something that seemed genuine, and then it would slide into the real agenda. "The kids need security," she'd say. "Don't you want them to have a safety net? What if something happens to you? They'd have nothing." "Rachel, they're adults. They have their own lives." Marcus is still figuring things out. Jennifer wants to start a business. David's in school. They need help, and you're in a position to give it to them now. It was never phrased as greed. It was always love, always framed as responsibility, as duty, as the right thing to do for the family. But underneath, I could feel the hunger, the expectation, the sense that I owed them something simply because the universe had decided to put money in my direction. Then came the visits. Rachel started showing up at my apartment unannounced with the kids. She'd bring them over, and they'd sit in my living room looking at me like I was supposed to fix their lives. Jennifer needed $50,000 to start her boutique business. Marcus had gotten himself into some debt that needed clearing. David wanted to transfer to a better university and needed tuition money. "You can afford it now," Rachel would say, sitting across from me, her eyes hard as diamonds. "You could help them without even feeling it. It would barely make a dent in what you have." What she meant was, "You have it, therefore it's ours." That was the math she was doing in her head. I loved my kids. I still do. But I wasn't blind. I could see what was happening. This wasn't about them needing help with genuine struggles. This was about a suddenly accessible pot of money that everyone around me had decided they deserved a piece of. The worst part was the guilt. And that's what she was counting on, I realized later. The guilt of a father who'd always tried to do right by his kids. The guilt of a man who'd worked his whole life and never had much to give them. Now I had something, and suddenly that guilt became a weapon. I started spending more time at the ranch. I needed to get away from Dallas, away from the constant pressure, away from the phone calls and the visits and the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on me. The ranch was peaceful. It was mine in a way nothing else had ever been. I'd walk the property at sunset and just breathe. It was during one of those walks that I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't angry exactly. I was something else. I was starting to see things clearly. And what I was seeing wasn't pretty. Rachel had hired a lawyer, a real official lawyer, to explore what she called my family obligations. She was building a case, she thought. She was going to force me to give them money. Or maybe she was hoping I'd just cave and give her what she wanted to make her go away. The kids started changing too. They became distant. Calls stopped being about checking in on their dad and started being about what I could do for them. When I didn't immediately agree to help with their requests, Jennifer stopped calling altogether. Marcus started talking to me differently with an edge of resentment. David just seemed confused and caught between his mother and his father, but he was definitely on her side. I sat in my lawyer's office in Austin, looking at the papers Rachel's lawyer had sent over, and I felt something harden in me. Not anger, something deeper, something like clarity. This was going to cost me. I could feel it. Not just money, though there would be plenty of that if I let this play out, but it was going to cost me my relationship with my kids. It was going to cost me my peace. It was going to consume me if I let it. And that's when I made a decision. It wasn't a sudden thing. It was more like I'd been walking toward a door for months and I'd finally reached it. I was going to have to do something that would change everything, something that would show them exactly who I was. Something that would force them all to face the reality of what they were doing. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to be a victim in my own story. I wasn't going to let guilt and obligation and family pressure dictate how I used what was mine. The ranch was mine, the money was mine, and more importantly, my life was mine. I stood up from my lawyer's desk and looked out the window at the Texas landscape beyond. Somewhere out there on those 3,000 acres was the answer. Not the answer to how to punish them or how to hurt them back, but the answer to who I really was when all the noise stopped and I had to face myself. That answer was coming, and when it arrived, everyone would know exactly what I'd inherited, and it wouldn't be what any of them expected. The first real confrontation happened on a Saturday morning in late October. I'd invited Rachel and all 3 kids to the ranch. I told them I wanted to talk about things as a family, that I wanted to find a solution everyone could live with. I lied. I wanted them to see something. I wanted them to understand something that no amount of phone calls or lawyers' letters could make them understand. When they arrived, they came in this convoy of nice cars. Rachel in her Mercedes SUV, Jennifer in the Range Rover I'd helped her pay for years ago, Marcus in his BMW. David came in his sensible Honda, which somehow made me sadder than anything else. At least he wasn't completely infected by this yet. The main house on the ranch was built in the early 1900s and had been updated over the years, but it still had this feeling of history, of weight, of something that mattered. We sat in the living room, all of us arranged like we were about to have some kind of formal business meeting rather than a family conversation. Rachel started before I even had a chance to speak. "We've been thinking about the best way to handle this," she said, and I could hear the rehearsal in her voice. She'd coached them. They'd practiced this. "And we think the most reasonable approach would be to set up trusts for the kids. Not the whole thing, obviously, but maybe 20% of the total value? That would give them each a solid foundation, and you'd still have plenty. 20%. $13.6 million. Just casually suggested, like she was asking me to pass the salt. "And then what?" I asked quietly. "After the trusts are set up?" "Then you manage the ranch, enjoy your retirement, and we all benefit from your good fortune as a family," Jennifer said. She'd learned to talk like her mother. Sharp. Calculating. "It's the right thing to do, Dad. We're family." "We're family," I repeated, not as an agreement, as a question. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He was the only one who seemed to feel the weight of what was happening. "Dad, maybe we could talk about this privately first. I don't think—" "It's fine," I said. "Everyone should hear this." I stood up and walked to the window. The ranch stretched out before me, 3,000 acres of rolling Texas landscape, cattle grazing in the distance, the land reaching all the way to the horizon. I'd only owned it for 3 months, but it felt like home in a way my apartment in Dallas never had. "I want to tell you something," I said, still looking out the window. "When I was younger, before any of you were born, I made a decision. I decided that I was going to be the kind of man who earned what he had, who didn't rely on handouts or lucky breaks. I worked every day to build something. It wasn't much compared to this, but it was mine." I turned to face them. "Your mother and I had good years. We had hard years, but I always made sure you kids had what you needed. School, clothes, a roof over your head. I did that because I was your father and that was my job. That job ended when you became adults. That's not cruel. That's not selfish. That's just how it works." Rachel opened her mouth, but I kept going. "Now I've inherited something I didn't earn, something I didn't ask for, and somehow that's become your responsibility to claim pieces of. That's not how this works." "It's not about claiming," David said quietly. "It's about family." "Is it?" I looked at him directly. "Because what I'm seeing is that the moment money appeared, so did expectations. Not love, not genuine concern. Expectations. And the moment I don't meet those expectations, I become the bad guy." Jennifer crossed her arms. "You're being selfish. You've had advantages we never had. Now you have even more, and you won't share." "I've had advantages." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jennifer, I sent you to private school. I helped you buy your first car. I co-signed your apartment lease. I've spent my entire life making sure you had more than I did. And the moment I say no to something, I become the villain." Marcus was looking at his shoes. Rachel was looking at me like I was the most unreasonable man she'd ever met. "What you're really upset about," Rachel said carefully, "is that we're asking you to do something you don't want to do. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but that's what family does. Family sometimes asks for things that are uncomfortable." "No," I said. "Family sometimes asks, but family also accepts when the answer is no. Family doesn't hire lawyers. Family doesn't strategize. Family doesn't treat each other like business transactions." I walked to a side table and picked up a folder. It was the documentation from the ranch, the property deeds, the financial statements, everything the lawyer had given me. I'm going to tell you something, and then I want you to listen very carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. I've hired my own lawyer, and he's going to make sure that this property, every single acre, every single dollar in the operations accounts stays exactly where it is, in my name, untouched by any claims you might make, and that's not negotiable. The room went completely silent. But I'm also going to do something else, I continued. I'm going to give each of you something, not because I owe it to you, and not because your mother convinced you that you deserve it, but because you're my kids and I love you. But it comes with conditions, real conditions this time. Conditions, Rachel said, her voice sharp. You can't. I can and I am. Marcus, I'm going to pay off your debt, all of it. But you're going to stop letting your mother run your life. You're going to make your own decisions and you're going to live with them. Jennifer, I'm going to help you with your business, but on one condition. You cut off your mother's involvement in your finances. You do this on your own merit or you don't do it at all. David, you can transfer universities and I'll cover the tuition difference, but you're going to stop letting guilt drive your decisions. This is insane, Jennifer said, standing up. You're punishing us for wanting to be close to you. No, I said. I'm teaching you the difference between love and manipulation, and I'm doing what I should have done years ago. I'm setting boundaries. Marcus looked up at me, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Not acceptance exactly, but understanding. The beginning of understanding. You three are my children, and I love you, I said, but I will not spend the rest of my life paying for the fact that I divorced your mother. I will not allow guilt to be a currency in this family anymore. You want a relationship with me? You're going to have to earn it the same way I earned everything else, through honesty, through respect, and through actually seeing me as a person instead of a walking bank account. Rachel stood up now too. Her face was flushed, her hands in fists. Do you understand what you're doing? She said. Do you understand what you're throwing away? I'm throwing away toxicity, I said, and I'm not sorry about it. You're going to regret this, she said. You're going to regret choosing money over your family. I'm not choosing money over family. I'm choosing self-respect. There's a difference. They left within an hour. The ride back to Dallas was probably uncomfortable in Rachel's Mercedes, everyone silent, everyone processing what had just happened. I watched them drive away from the porch of the ranch house, and I felt this strange sensation. Not relief exactly, not yet. It was more like the sensation of something heavy finally being set down. I'd been carrying that weight so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to not carry it. That night, I sat on the porch of the ranch with a whiskey and a cigar, watching the sun disappear behind the horizon. I thought about what I'd done, what I'd said, what I'd risked. I'd probably damaged my relationship with my kids, maybe permanently. Rachel would probably use this against me. Jennifer would probably hate me. David would probably side with his mother because that's what he'd been taught to do. But something inside me had shifted. I'd stopped being ashamed. I'd stopped apologizing for having something. I'd stopped letting other people's wants dictate my own life. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. It was my lawyer. He sounded excited about something, which was unusual for him. I need to talk to you about something, he said. Something that just came to light. It's about your uncle's will, and it's about why he left you this property instead of your cousin Thomas. Okay, I said slowly. What about it? Your uncle left detailed notes with the will. He wanted you to understand his decision, and it turns out there's something in that decision, something about your character, about something you did for him years ago, that explains everything. And this changes things. It changes a lot of things. And I waited for him to continue. Can you come to the office Monday morning? He asked. What is this about? I asked. It's about why your uncle left you this ranch instead of leaving it to someone else. And it's about a secret he's been keeping his entire life. A secret that, once you understand it, is going to show you exactly who you really are. I hung up the phone and looked out at the darkness of the ranch. The land stretched out before me, invisible now in the night, but I could feel it there. I could feel the weight of it, the potential of it, the something that was waiting in the shadows. Monday was going to change everything, and I didn't know if I was ready for it, but I was going to find out. Monday morning came faster than I expected. I drove from the ranch back to Austin, back to that same lawyer's office where everything had started 3 months ago. The sun was coming up over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I felt this weight in my chest. Something was coming. I could feel it like electricity in the air before a storm. My lawyer, Richard, was already at his desk when I arrived. He had papers spread out in front of him, old papers, yellow documents that looked like they'd been stored away for decades. He looked nervous, which wasn't like him at all. Richard was the kind of guy who'd seen everything, dealt with everything, and nothing rattled him anymore, but this had rattled him. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "This is going to take a while, and you need to hear all of it before you react." I sat down, my hands were steady, but my heart was doing something strange in my chest. "Your Uncle Thomas," Richard began, then stopped himself. "Actually, let me start differently. Your Uncle Thomas wasn't just your uncle, not biologically anyway, not exactly." I felt my stomach shift. "What do you mean, not exactly?" "Your grandmother, your father's mother, she had a son before she married your grandfather. She was very young, unmarried, and in those days that was scandalous. She gave the baby up for adoption. That baby was Thomas." The office seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the arms of the chair. Thomas didn't know this until he was 47 years old. Someone contacted him with DNA information, a distant relative, and he started digging. He found out the truth about his adoption, about who his biological family was. He found out about your father, about you, about your entire family history that he'd never known existed. "Okay," I said slowly. "So Thomas was my uncle through adoption, but he left me a $68 million ranch. Why?" Richard picked up one of the old documents. It was a letter, handwritten, creased and worn from handling. "Because of something that happened," Richard said. "Something that happened when Thomas first came looking for his biological family. He was hurt. He felt abandoned. He'd spent his entire life not knowing where he came from, and when he finally found out, it opened up all of these wounds. He tracked down your father. And when he met your father for the first time, your father rejected him. Said he didn't want anything to do with him. That Thomas was a mistake, a family shame, something best left in the past." I closed my eyes. My father had been a hard man, cold. I'd never realized how cold until that moment. "Thomas was devastated," Richard continued. "He went through a bad period, very bad. He was drinking heavily, wasn't taking care of himself. He felt like he'd finally found his family, and they'd thrown him away all over again." Richard looked at me directly now. "And then you showed up at his door." I opened my eyes. "What? You were 18 years old. You'd had a fight with your father about something, I don't remember what. But you were angry and hurt, and you decided to drive out to find Thomas. You'd heard your father mention him once in a moment of rage, and you tracked him down somehow. You showed up at his house without warning." I was starting to remember. Vaguely. It was so long ago. "Thomas didn't know you," Richard said. "He'd never met you, but you knew who he was. And you sat on his porch for 3 hours talking to him. You didn't know his story. You didn't know he was going through hell. You just talked to him. You treated him like he mattered. You treated him like he was family." "I was just a kid," I said quietly. "You were, but you did something that Thomas never forgot. You came back. After that first visit, you came back. Every month or so you'd drive out and spend time with him. You never asked him for anything. You never made him feel like he owed you anything. You just showed up and treated him like he was important, like he was worth your time. Richard slid a photograph across the desk. It was me at 18, standing next to a man I barely remembered, both of us smiling at the camera. Thomas, my uncle, who wasn't really my uncle, but who was. Thomas got sober, Richard said. He pulled himself out of that hole, and he always said it was because of you, because someone had shown him that he mattered, that he wasn't a mistake, that his life had value. I couldn't speak. He became very successful over the years, built a real estate empire in Texas, invested in ranches and properties, made millions, and the entire time he watched you from a distance. He watched you work hard. He watched you raise your kids. He watched you try to be the man your father never was, and he was proud of you, so proud that he made a will that left everything to you. Richard picked up another document, but here's the part that changes everything. Thomas included a letter in his will, a letter specifically for you. And in that letter, he explains why he left you everything. And he tells you something about yourself that you need to hear. Richard opened the letter. His hands actually trembled slightly as he did. He wrote this 6 months before he died, Richard said. Read it. Richard turned the letter so I could see it. The handwriting was shaky, the writing of an older man, but it was clear enough to read. My dearest nephew, I'm writing this letter because I want you to know something before I'm gone. By the time you read this, I'll be dead, and you'll be inheriting a ranch worth more money than you've ever imagined. And I know you'll think it's because I was grateful, and you'll be right. But it's more than that. When you were 18 years old, you showed up at my door. I don't know if you remember. I was a broken man. I'd been abandoned by the family that should have loved me. I was drinking myself to death because I couldn't face the fact that I'd spent my whole life with a lie. And then you came. You didn't have to. You had no obligation. But you came anyway. And you sat with me on that porch, and you treated me like I was worth something, like I was family. Not because you had to, not because you expected anything in return, but because that's who you are. You're the kind of man who sees someone hurting and you show up. I've watched you your whole life. I've seen you work harder than anyone should have to work. I've seen you try to be a good father, a good man, when your own father never showed you how. I've seen you accept less than you deserve because you were afraid of being selfish. And I've seen you give and give and give until there was nothing left to give. This ranch, this money, it's not a reward. It's not a debt. It's a gift from one family member to another. It's me finally having the chance to do what your family should have done years ago. It's me saying, you matter. Your life matters. You deserve to have something that's completely and entirely yours. I need you to understand something. You're going to be tempted to give this away. People are going to tell you it's your obligation to share. Your ex-wife is going to tell you it's your responsibility to the children. People are going to make you feel guilty for having something they don't have. But I want you to listen to me now, even though I'm gone. Don't give it away, not because you're selfish, but because you've spent your whole life giving to people who didn't deserve it, people who took advantage of you, people who made you feel small. Keep this ranch, keep this money, not out of greed, but out of self-respect. You've earned the right to have something that's yours. You've earned the right to say no. You've earned the right to put yourself first for once in your miserable life. And if you do that, if you have the courage to actually keep something for yourself, then you'll understand the real gift I'm giving you. It's not the money, it's permission. Permission to stop apologizing for existing. Permission to stop feeling guilty for wanting more. Permission to finally be the man you were always meant to be. I love you. I always have, even before I knew you. Thomas. I couldn't read the rest. My vision blurred. Richard sat quietly across from me, giving me space to process. When I finally looked up, Richard slid another envelope across the desk. There's more, he said gently. Thomas wanted you to know something else, something about your father." "My father," I said, my voice rough. "Your father was dying when Thomas reached out to him," Richard said. "This was about 6 months before your father passed. Thomas didn't know your father was sick. He just wanted to meet him, to finally have some connection to his biological family, and your father rejected him. It was cruel. It was final." Richard opened the envelope and pulled out a handwritten note in my father's shaky handwriting. "But before your father died," Richard continued, "he wrote something. He wrote it alone, and he gave it to me with instructions to give it to Thomas if Thomas ever came back looking. But Thomas never came back. So now I'm giving it to you." The note was short, just a few sentences. "If you ever see him again, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I was afraid. Tell him I didn't know how to love a son I'd given away. Tell him the only good thing I ever did was raise the son I kept. Tell him he turned out better than I ever did. I read it 3 times. My father, the man who'd been so cold, so distant, so incapable of showing affection, he'd been afraid." "There's one more thing," Richard said, and his voice was very quiet now. "Thomas didn't leave the ranch just to you." "What do you mean?" "He left instructions, specific instructions about what you should do. And if you follow them, if you have the courage to do what he's asking, then you're going to understand exactly who you really are, and everyone in your life is going to understand it too." Richard pulled out a document. It was pages long, single-spaced, detailed instructions written in Thomas's careful handwriting. "He wants you to do something," Richard said. "And it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be controversial, and it's going to change everything." "What?" I asked. Richard slid the document across to me and I started reading. The more I read, the more my breath came faster. The more I understood what Thomas was asking of me, and the more I understood why he was asking it. It wasn't about keeping the money. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about something much bigger, something about legacy, something about breaking cycles, something about finally being honest about who you really are and what you really deserve. I finished reading and looked up at Richard. "Can I do this?" I asked. "Legally, is this possible?" "It is," Richard said. And Thomas knew it would be difficult. He knew people would resist. He knew people would be angry. But he also knew that you were the kind of man who could handle it. The kind of man who could do the right thing even when it cost him everything. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the Austin skyline stretched out before me. Busy, moving, full of people who had no idea that their lives were about to change. That my life was about to change. That everything I thought I understood about who I was supposed to be was about to be rewritten. "When do I have to decide?" I asked. "You don't," Richard said. "Thomas gave you until the end of the year. 6 months to think about it, to decide if you have the courage." I turned back to look at him. "But I'll tell you something," Richard continued. "In all my years practicing law, I've only seen one person have the kind of courage this requires, and that was Thomas himself. He had to decide whether to keep searching for a family that rejected him or to move on. He chose to move on. He chose to build his own life, his own legacy. And now he's asking me to do something similar," I said. "He's asking you to be brave," Richard said. "He's asking you to be honest. And he's asking you to finally stop letting other people define who you are." I picked up the document with Thomas's instructions and held it in my hands. It was heavy, not physically, but it felt heavy. "Will you help me?" I asked. "That's why I'm here," Richard said. I left the office that afternoon with a copy of Thomas's instructions and a new understanding of everything that had happened. The ranch wasn't just a piece of property. It was a test. It was a gift. It was an inheritance of something much more valuable than money. It was permission to finally become the man I was always supposed to be. The next 3 months were the longest and most difficult of my life. I read Thomas's instructions over and over again until I had them memorized. I sat on the porch of the ranch at night and thought about what he was asking me to do. I thought about the consequences. I thought about how people would react. And I thought about why he believed I was the man who could actually do it. The instructions were clear. Thomas wanted me to use the ranch as a foundation for something bigger. Something that would help people like him, people who'd been cast out by their families, people who'd been told they were mistakes, people who needed to understand that their lives had value even when the world told them otherwise. He wanted me to create a retreat center on a portion of the ranch, a place where people could come to heal, where they could learn self-respect, where they could understand that they deserved to have boundaries, that they deserved to say no, that they deserved to put themselves first without feeling guilty about it. It was ambitious, it was expensive, and it would take years to implement, but it was also perfect. Because as I thought about it more, I realized that Thomas wasn't just asking me to do this for strangers. He was asking me to do it because it would force me to confront everything I was struggling with. It would force me to become the man I needed to be in order to help others become that man too. In November, I called Rachel, not to ask permission or to discuss it, just to inform her of what was happening. I'm creating a foundation, I told her. It's called the Thomas Foundation, and it's going to use a portion of the ranch to create a retreat center for people who've experienced family trauma. What does that have to do with me? She asked, suspicious immediately. It has to do with you because you're going to understand that your attempts to manipulate me for money have ended. The ranch is not an asset to be divided. It's not going to generate money for you or the kids. It's a working property that's going to be dedicated to helping people. You're being vindictive, she said coldly. I'm being clear, I replied. And I'm also being generous. You asked for 20% of the property value. That's $13.6 million. I'm giving you $5 million, a one-time payment. That's more than enough to secure your future and the kids' futures if you're smart about it. But that's all you're getting from me. And I want it in writing that this ends all claims you have on the ranch or on my estate. She was silent for a long moment. You're punishing us, she said finally. No, I said. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. She hung up on me. The kids were harder. I called Marcus first. He was surprised to hear from me. It had been 3 months since the confrontation at the ranch. I want you to understand something, I told him. I love you. I will always love you. But our relationship moving forward is going to be different. I'm not going to be the person who enables bad behavior. I'm not going to let guilt drive my decisions anymore. If you want a relationship with me, it's going to be based on honesty and respect, not money. Dad, he started, but I kept going. I'm setting aside $250,000 for you, not because you deserve it, but because I want to help you get on your feet as an adult. That money comes with one condition. You do therapy, real therapy, not just talking to a friend. You figure out why you let your mother control you. You figure out who you are when you're not trying to please her or trying to please me, and you do that work. There was a long pause. Okay, he said quietly. I can do that. And Marcus, I added, when you're done with that work, call me. We'll have dinner. We'll start over. Jennifer was different. She was angry. She felt betrayed. She felt like I'd chosen money over family. You always were a selfish bastard, she said, when I told her about the foundation. Maybe I am, I said, but I'm a selfish bastard with boundaries, and you're going to learn to respect those boundaries, or you're not going to be part of my life. She hung up before I could say anything else. David called me in tears. He was the most confused by everything. He didn't understand why I was being so harsh, why I wasn't just giving them what they wanted. Because love isn't about giving people everything they ask for, I told him gently. Love is sometimes about saying no. Love is sometimes about making people face reality. I'm doing this because I love you, all of you, but I love myself more. And I'm teaching you to do the same. 2 weeks before Christmas, the plans for the foundation were finalized. We broke ground in January. It was a cold day, the sun low on the horizon, the wind sharp. Richard was there with me, and so was a small team of architects and builders. I stood on the property where the retreat center would be built, and I thought about Thomas. I thought about what it must have felt like for him to finally find his family and then be rejected. I thought about how he'd chosen to transform that pain into something meaningful, and I thought about how I'd spent my whole life running from pain instead of running toward it. The media got wind of the story in February, a story about a man who'd inherited a $68 million ranch and decided to use it for charity instead of personal enrichment. A story about someone who'd told his family no. A story about boundaries and self-respect and healing. The articles were mixed. Some people called me a hero. Some people called me a selfish man who'd rejected his family. Some people tried to figure out the real story behind the headlines, convinced that there was some scandal, some hidden truth that explained everything. There wasn't. The truth was simple. Someone had loved me enough to leave me something precious, and I'd loved myself enough to actually keep it. In March, I got a call from Jennifer. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble. "I've been in therapy. Not the kind you suggested, but therapy. And I've been thinking about things, about how I treated you, about how Mom manipulated me, and I'm sorry." "I appreciate that," I said. "I don't want the money," she continued. "Well, I do, but not in the way I did before. I want to earn it. I want to build my business the right way. And I want a relationship with you, real relationship, not one based on what you can give me." We talked for an hour. She told me about her business, about her plans, about how she was starting to understand who she was when her mother wasn't telling her who to be. David came around in April. He transferred to a different university, the one he actually wanted to attend. He stopped calling his mother every day. He started calling me instead, just to talk, just to connect. Marcus finished his therapy in May. We had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the ranch, and he told me what he'd discovered about himself. He told me about the patterns he'd inherited from our family. He told me about the work he was doing to break those patterns. "I want to help with the foundation," he said. "If you'll have me, I want to be part of what you're building." I said yes. In June, 6 months after that first meeting with Richard, the first group of people arrived at the Thomas Foundation. There were 12 of them. 12 people who'd experienced family trauma, who'd been told they were mistakes, who were learning what it meant to have boundaries and to respect themselves. I watched them arrive, watched them look around at the retreat center that had been built on Thomas's land, and I felt something settle inside me. This was what Thomas had meant. This was the real inheritance. Not the money, not the land, not the property, but the understanding that your life has value, that you matter, that you deserve to protect yourself, that love sometimes means saying no. On the final day of that first retreat, I stood in front of the group and told them about Thomas, about how he'd been rejected by his family, about how he'd chosen to transform that pain into purpose, about how he'd left me this ranch, not because he wanted me to use it to build an empire, but because he wanted me to use it to help others understand their own worth. I watched tears fall down their faces. I watched them hug each other. I watched them understand that they were not alone in their pain, and I understood in that moment who I really was. I was the kind of man who showed up. I was the kind of man who saw pain and tried to help. I was the kind of man who could say no without guilt. I was the kind of man who could love his family while still protecting his own boundaries. I was not my father's son, not completely. I was also Thomas's nephew. I was also the man I'd chosen to become. That night, I stood on the porch of the ranch house and looked out at the land stretching before me. In the distance, I could see lights from the retreat center. I could see people sitting in groups, talking, healing, learning to respect themselves. My phone buzzed, a text from Richard. "Thomas would be proud." I typed back, "I'm proud of me." And I meant it. For the first time in my life, I meant it completely. I wasn't ashamed of what I'd inherited. I wasn't guilty about what I'd chosen to keep. I wasn't apologizing for being selfish enough to put myself first. I was simply living, simply being, simply understanding that the greatest inheritance Thomas had ever given me wasn't the ranch or the money. It was permission to finally become myself.